Hello and welcome. This is a new episode of Food for Diabetes or Nutrition for Diabetes. And in this episode, we talk about protein. On the last two episodes, we talked about the importance of maintaining a good amount of vegetables, about half the plate, for control of blood sugar, as well as keeping the starch amount at 1/4 of the plate and not more. Today, we talk about the importance of protein. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that this applies to everyone because protein is more than just meat. Some people may say, well, I don't really like meat, I don't eat meat. The person may be vegetarian or they may just not be able to afford meat. And what I want to tell you is that it's perfectly fine to not have meat if you don't want to, but that doesn't mean that you can skip the protein. The protein list that I have listed here for you includes a lot of things, including not just meat, but poultry, fish, tofu, eggs, nuts, seeds, low-fat cheese, and even soy meat substitutes or soy protein substitutes. The other important point about the protein is that the way it's cooked is extremely important. We should not have the protein fried. There are many cooking methods that are available for you. You could have it roasted, baked, grilled, or anything that you would like, but not fried. And the reason is two things. Number one is frying increases the calorie amount in the food by adding a lot of fat to the food. But the second thing is that particularly for diabetes, frying is not a good idea because you fry either using flour or breadcrumbs, and both of them will increase the carbohydrate content of the meal, causing the blood sugar to rise. The third point I want to make is that protein is very important for both glucose control and weight control. Protein makes a person feel full and it lowers the absorption of glucose into your system, making the blood sugar not spike as much. So for all of these reasons, I recommend that you have protein. Now, so if you don't already know, there is a big war raging on in the nutritional world right now about the role of fat and protein in healthy nutrition. And I am not going to take sides in this controversy or war, but I want to tell you that regardless of where you stand or how you feel about animal proteins, about fat, and so on, you still need some protein in your diet. And we're going to give options for everybody to be able to do just that. So when we say protein is more than meat, we want everybody to be able to get some form of protein. If you're vegetarian or if you don't like meat or can't afford it, you can still have some other sources of protein. If you love meat, that's great, but also be sure to vary a little bit the source of your protein in diet so that you can get a complete and full nutrition. In this slide, I'm going to show you some of the options that are proteins but not of animal sources, and they include beans of various sorts that are very rich in protein. Quinoa has protein, as well as soy and other products that are soy substitutes that have high amounts of protein. So we can incorporate those in our meal, but you have to be careful, especially if you're using the beans, because remember, those are starchy vegetables. So you don't want to be eating a whole plate of beans or of starchy vegetables if you have diabetes, because that can increase your blood sugar. So you have to be mindful of the quantity as well. Let's take an example with this plate. Is this plate a plate that has good amount of protein for use, and is it diabetes friendly? The answer to both questions is no. This is a plate that has a lot of rice, has some vegetables and some beans, and those beans obviously can be a source of some protein, but that's not sufficient. The main ingredient in the plate is rice with corn, that is a starchy vegetable, and that raises the amount of carbohydrates in that meal significantly. Well, let's take another example. In this plate, you see noodles that are carbohydrates, but you also have vegetables and soy protein, tofu. That increases the amount of protein in the diet, and the amount of starch, which is the noodles in this plate, is not excessive. Therefore, it is a diabetes-friendly plate and has good protein amount. Now, the second point that I would like to make about the protein is that it should not be fried, and we discussed a little bit why that should be the case. So having said that, let's take some examples of some plates and see if they are diabetes friendly or not. How about this plate? You see here that the source of protein is fish, but it is fried fish and has with it some French fries as well as hush puppies, which both of them are high in carbohydrate amount. There is obviously some coleslaw salad, but that is not going to make up for the lack of vegetables and greens in the meal, and this meal has a very high amount of carbohydrate, not to mention fat and calories. So this is not a good diabetes meal. On the other hand, here you see this is a plate that has chicken as well as a lot of vegetables, and it's very delicious, but at the same time does not have a lot of carbohydrates. So this can be very low carb meal that would be very friendly for diabetes, but at the same time satisfying. And now let's talk about the third point, which is that presence of protein is important for both glucose and weight control. Now notice that this applies across the board, and we will make a video in the future about snacks, whether a person should have them or not. And one thing I want you to remember until then is that one should not have a snack consisting only of carbohydrates. If a person were to snack, they should not get pure carbohydrates for a snack, because that has bad effects on both the blood sugar and on the weight control. Now, having said that, let's test our knowledge and see if we can identify what plates are good for diabetes and what plates are not. Is this plate diabetes friendly or not? Well, you see here that you have some meat protein. The size of the meat or the amount of the meat is a little bit more than we'd like it to be. It's about half the plate, but the other half is made mainly of carbohydrates. You have two choices, bread and mashed potatoes, and that increases the amount of carbs in the meal significantly. You have a little bit of lonely vegetables here that feel kind of left out in the middle of all this massive assault of meat and carbohydrates. So I would say no, this is not a diabetes-friendly meal. On the other hand, when you look at this plate, you see a good proportion of vegetables as well as protein and starch. The amount of starch is 1/4 of the plate, and there is no additional starches that are in the form of bread or anything else outside of the plate. So therefore, this is a good diabetes-friendly meal. Another example here. First of all, let's ask the question, do we have any form of protein in this plate? And the answer is yes. We do have eggs, and eggs is a good source of protein. But we also have a tremendous amount of starch in the form of rice. That increases the carbohydrate content of the meal significantly and makes it not a diabetes-friendly meal. On the other hand, this plate has good proportion of vegetables, noodles, and chicken. Notice that the chicken is not fried and that the starch amount is small and limited. Now, there is a lot of controversy and a lot of misunderstandings in this point, because some patients with diabetes think that they can never have any form of pasta or any form of rice or bread ever. but that is not quite the case. Now, obviously, there are forms of pasta that are better than others, and forms of rice that are better than others. For example, the brown rice would be better than white rice and so on. But the most important thing to remember is the portion size. If you get one small portion in this size that is mentioned or seen here on this plate, then this should be a good amount that would not raise the blood sugar too much. That is something important to remember. So this is a diabetes-friendly meal, even though it has pasta. And hello again, our plate of seafood that is fried and has a lot of French fries and of hush puppies. And if you remember what we said, this is not a good diabetes meal because it has too many grams of carbohydrates and not enough vegetables at all. So I would give it a no. But this does not mean that you cannot have seafood. As a matter of fact, fish and seafood are excellent sources of protein, and we'd like to have them more incorporated in the meal, and this plate is an example of that. So this is salmon together with some potatoes, but you have a lot of vegetables. Now I have to be careful here because some of the vegetables here are starchy vegetables, such as the sweet peas, but the total amount of starchy vegetables in this plate is not excessive, so I would say this is a good diabetes-friendly meal overall. And finally, as a reminder, the proteins are important. Protein is more than just meat. The protein option with the meal should not be fried, and it is important for glucose and weight control. So I hope that you can incorporate more protein in your diet and vary the source of protein to obtain a good nutrition. And until we meet again in our next video, please be well and be careful.